So here we are in the 1930s. The 1930s, of course, brought on the Great Depression, and Depression-era beauty was very similar to the 1920s in that cosmetics were a very large part of daily life. It was considered a luxury, but it was considered well worth the expense because it was far less expensive than other aspects of beauty. Therefore, people struggled really hard to make their makeup last. They had all these ingenious ideas for prolonging your makeup, the actual product itself, prolonging it in the jar or in the tube. But they still bought it regularly. Staples of cosmetics at this time were powder, rouge, eyeshadow, mascara, eyeliner, and lipstick. They were all very common, and they were commonplace for even everyday women. Pancake makeup was developed in the 1930s by Max Factor as well, and we still have that today because the properties of pancake makeup are still very useful in a lot of today's especially theatrical productions. It provides a completely matte, flawless canvas to the skin. It doesn't provide a whole lot of dimension to the face, so therefore flat matte makeup was very common at this time period. And this was in answer to the cosmetic needs of the film industry with the realm of color that they were entering. Color film was very new, and so they had started all of these new experimental makeup techniques and makeup products that would, what they felt like, flatter the skin most in color, on color film. Drawing in a beauty mark was very common. I actually just darkened one that I already have, and that was also very common for film. However, in the realm of fashion, a beauty mark that was drawn in was typically drawn in with a like in a heart shape or a star. It wasn't really supposed to look natural. Another thing that was brought on with the cinematic change to color film was green powder. A green beauty powder was used to eliminate redness, still does today. We typically use a green cream corrector instead of a green powder, but it definitely helps with redness. And another very popular powder at the time was called Rachel powder. And Rachel was really a color. It was kind of a peachy shade perhaps, but it was considered like universally flattering, kind of like Nara's orgasm maybe. But it was considered universally flattering, so a lot of times they would say use your Rachel powder, when in actuality that was really just kind of the brand name. It would be kind of like saying use a Kleenex instead of using a tissue. Actually, I think that's interesting, but it became synonymous with flattering kind of multi-use powder, face powder. In skincare, cold creams were becoming a common product on the vanity. Witch hazel as an astringent was still used very commonly and is still used today. I actually use witch hazel myself. It's an excellent, excellent astringent for dry skin. Vanishing creams, anti-wrinkle creams, all of these like, you know, youth harnessing products were also still very popular in the 30s. And today, that will never go out of style, I don't think. Brows were thin and arched. They were arched in different ways. There was a very strong tendency, especially in film, for women to wear their eyebrows in almost a sharp angle that went upwards towards the outer hairline and then sloped downwards in a subtle slope. There was also the tendency, like Marlene Dietrich actually did not include the slope. She would just angle her eyebrows and then leave it at that. A very beautiful and flattering eyebrow shape of the decade was Joan Crawford's early 30s eyebrows, where they were very, very pale, and they almost looked as if they were shaved or bleached. They were probably bleached, but they were very pale and very arched and thin, and this was actually a very flattering look for her, and God knows why she did not stay with it. Never mind. But that was another very popular thing, is to bleach the eyebrows and make it look almost as if they were shaved, but to keep the same angular sloping appearance of them. They were sometimes penciled in entirely, such as with Jean Harlow. She sometimes wore a thin brow that was her own brow, just dressed up, but then sometimes the eyebrows were completely shaved and in a complete arch, a complete U-shaped arch. This was made popular by Jean Harlow and was also very common in fashion, as you can see from the ads that I'm going to post at the end of this video, the photo slideshow. Garbo also popularized a very thin arched brow, but it varied in thickness. Sometimes it was very thick and arched, and included a lot of her natural brow, and then sometimes, I don't know, perhaps they shaved it, but I think they would just pencil in a very, very thin eyebrow, depending on what they wanted from her in her films. If they wanted her to have more of a stern appearance, they would give her a thicker brow. If they wanted her to look more delicate, because she already had somewhat severe features, they would give her a delicate, very thin brow. The common shape for the everyday woman was not this thin, arched, perfectly U shape. It was actually encouraged in beauty books at the time to allow 1 inch between and not to overpluck. So therefore, even though this was a very, very common eyebrow shape that we see by watching films from the decade, it really wasn't considered the most flattering eyebrow shape, and is still not. Lips were full and overdrawn in many cases. This was called the smear, or the hunter's bow, and it was popularized by Max Factor for Joan Crawford because he felt her lips were uneven and that they needed extension. So that's the lips that I did today. The top is overdrawn into a rounded bow, and it barely comes in at the middle, and the bottom is almost flat. You can see it's squared across the bottom. And this gave a serious look to the face, so that whenever she was in dramatic roles, it just helped with her dramatic appearance of her face. See, looks sad. Reds and deep raspberry lip tones were very popular. Heart-shaped lips also were in fashion, but I've already featured those on my Jean Harlow tutorial that I did a couple of years ago, so those can be seen in that video. Very thin lips like Greta Garbo were also still popular. She helped to make the thin-lipped woman still feel beautiful and attractive in spite of the new developments of lip shapes in cinema. Eyeshadows were still meant to mainly match the eyes, but sometimes clothing. It kind of depended on who you spoke to in the beauty industry. Hair color also played a part. Finally, women were starting to understand that your hair color and your eye makeup and your eye color could all blend together and really lend itself to a popular, or lend itself to an attractive overall cohesive look. Greens, grays, blues, purples were very popular eyeshadow colors, and there were matching mascaras. Many people don't realize that, but there were matching mascaras at that time. Blues, violets, those were very popular, and they were considered a great way to enhance eye color. Petroleum jelly on the lids for a glossy appearance was also ideal for daytime. Many women did not wear eyeshadow during the day at all. They simply put petroleum jelly on their eyes. And of course, since there was no eyeshadow or anything to think about, it didn't crease like it would if we were to put it over eyeshadow, as they do in a lot of fashion cinematography now, or a lot of fashion photography now. Still harnesses that really cool glossy lid look, but most of the time it's not wearable because it would crease badly. These women were just putting it over a bare lid to give some shine and highlight to the eyes, and it was actually very attractive. Shimmery shadows were used in the evening. Mascara was applied to define the lashes, and some lashes were usually applied to the outer corner to make the eye look sleepy. It's kind of a soft, fluttery eyelash at the outer corner. It wasn't the uplifted eyelash of the 40s and 50s. It was the sleepy eyelash. So false eyelashes were utilized often in the evening, but they were more in a they were still applied to the outer corner, but typically a little farther down to lend a sleepy effect. A dot of rouge at the inner corner was actually considered a very subtle and attractive way to open up the eyes and bring emphasis to the eyes, much in the same way that we would use a concealer or a white shimmer powder now. Eyeliner was also encouraged on the outer edge, straight out, to make them seem longer. So this winged eyeshadow effect was starting to become popular, especially in the European and Asian countries. But for the majority of the decade, most of the eyes were mostly rounded and sleepy, as you can see in my other tutorials. My Greta Garbo and my Jean Harlow tutorial both kind of utilize the round eye shape. But this look was more in keeping with that upturned effect. The winged eyeshadow was not at the top lid pulled straight out. It was typically brought all the way down and then out, so that the eyes still had a sleepy quality, and added to the effect of the lashes at the outer corner. Cheeks were still applied upward towards the eye to accentuate the eye, but it was starting to be understood that it could also help with face shape. So rouge was encouraged towards the nose and upward to accentuate youth. But then it was also encouraged outside of the eye to help accentuate, to help create the ideal face shape. So people were starting to get an understanding of how to use rouge for different effects. Max Factor started to popularize the idea of the method of carrying the blush all the way towards the hairline to accentuate the cheekbones, and this of course is an idea that caught on and stayed. Women experimented with odd colors in nail polish in the 30s. Black, green, blue, gold, silver, and gray were popular nail polish colors. This was a short-lived fad, but it was a very, very popular fad. And it was also popular throughout the decade to match lip and nail color. I'm sure that the blue that they used was not a metallic blue like this one, but I do have it on good authority that the blue was a dark, bright blue, and or a deep navy blue. It was a very dark pigmented blue. It was still popular to leave the half moon bare, and that manicure maintained in popularity throughout the 30s and 40s. Clothing, the cloche hat was still very popular, but elaborate hat shapes were starting to become into fashion. If you watch the movie The Women from 1939, it is a really great representation of the whole decade when it comes to the elaborate headdresses. The hats were oddly shaped, they were interesting, but sometimes they were horribly unflattering, and it really was just a matter of making a statement. Sometimes the statement was a bad one, but women still did it because, you know, just like we do now. Bobbed hair was very popular and usually was quite fuzzy and frizzy. It was very common to just have the curliest bob that you could to fluff out the sides and give it lots of volume at the sides. Waves were still harnessed, curls were still defined, but a nice frizzy bob was also very much part of casual style of the decade. Had a very voluminous appearance. It wasn't as closely cropped and polished as it was in the 20s. Trousers and shorts became really popular active wear. They were usually not worn with an overabundance of constrictive undergarments. They were easy to wear, comfortable, you know, button-up blouses and house dresses. These wonderful button front 30s dresses are still very much in demand today because of their comfort and because they are very forgiving and flattering on many shapes. Tomboyish looks were popular for the younger crowd. Blonde hair, of course, became a huge, huge trend in the 30s because of Jean Harlow. So that pretty much covers most of the decade as far as what the trends were and what they were all about. I hope that this was exciting and interesting for you. I'm hoping that the tutorial is equally interesting. It should be coming up shortly, and it will be for this look, which is kind of a hodgepodge of the casual hairstyling of the decade, but also the more elaborate on-screen makeup of actresses like Joan Crawford. So I hope you enjoy it. And until then, until the 40s, we will enjoy the slideshow, and we'll talk to you later.